descendant or a recipient of those Muslims who came to America by way of the African diaspora. And if you look at how that group of people were decimated, reclassified, and marginalized, you can see what will be the end results of Gaza if we don't raise our voices. So we have to make our presence known so that those people, our brothers and sisters in Palestine, will not be erased from the earth. Also, I'm the author of the book Bilal ibn Rabah, the son of an Arab, Racism, Colorism, and Islam, and also The History of Islam in America, a tabletop magazine that gives you a timeline of the Muslims and their evolution in America. Today, my topic is Islam in America, the untold story. And I really mean the untold story. The legacy of our Black Muslim heroes. And I'm going to, inshallah ta'ala, I want to give away a book today, a book free. So inshallah, this book is I Buried Malcolm, the final chapter, and the legacy of Al-Hajj Sheikh Jaaber, my father, yarhamullah. And when I say the final chapter, that is because Alex Haley left this out of his book. So at the end of my presentation, I'm going to ask you, actually during my presentation, a series of questions. And if you get them right, then you can get this book. If not, you're going to have to purchase it for $25 at the table. Inshallah. But let us turn to Africa. Africa, as we know, once upon a time, was at least 65% Muslim. 65% Muslim. And we know that the majority of those slaves who came into America came by way of the African diaspora being extracted from West Africa. So my topic will start with Muslim slaves in America. And if anyone can recognize this person here, they will be able to get a book. Raise your hand. I'm only going to give you one chance. Yes. He got it wrong. Yes. Alhamdulillah, you can get the book at the table. Barakallahu feek. That is him. And you know what is unique about him? That he came from a noble tribe. He was educated. He was a prince. He was a prince. And he was actually a victim of kidnapping, and he ended up in America. But alhamdulillah, after 2 years, he was able to negotiate his return to Africa. He was a very fortunate slave. Who is this slave? Any hands? His name is Muhammad bin Said. They know him as Nicholas Said. He was actually enslaved in Africa, Turkey, and Russia, and he spoke 9 languages. And he came to America in 1863. As a free person, he joined the Union Army and fought against the rebel states, the Confederates in the South. He was a Muslim. And not only that, he was a Hajj. Who was that? That is Saleh Bilal. He's also come from the land of Mali. And he spent 40 years of his life in servitude on the Sopelo Islands of Georgia. If you know it, say their names. This is Yaro Mahmoud. He himself come from Guinea. He spent 44 years in servitude, and he purchased his own freedom. He became a real estate broker. He invested in the stock markets, and he was very open with his Islam. He chanted the Quran in public, and he prayed in public places. Yaru Mahmoud. Come on. This is our legacy. Huh? Mackindale. Franco Mackindale was from Haiti. He fought against the French colonists. And when they captured him as he was a maroon, they burned him alive. But his last words were, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Now we're talking about Ibrahim bin Abdul Rahman bin Ibrahim, the prince among slaves. And we know he negotiated his freedom as well. And of course, an icon who sits at the centerpiece of all slaves, who has an elaborate autobiography written or recorded in Arabic. What is his name? Omar bin Said. He too was a Hajj. In fact, he was the first Muslim slave that were held in captivity in America that was a Hajj. And we have the free Moors, and we're going to talk about that. Who is this person? Come on, let me give away some books. This is Estebano Az-Zamur. He was a black Arab from the town of Az-Zamur from El Maghrib, Morocco. And he was the first Muslim to set foot on the New World. They didn't put this in the history books. You see, I read 4,800 pages of American history, and not one of these individuals was cited in there as a Muslim. You have to know her. Please, this is Zuma, or Az-Zuma. And Az-Zuma actually is El Juma, and she was from Nigeria. Okay? She was the last Muslim slave to arrive in America in 1860. When was the Emancipation Proclamation? 1865. She spent 5 years in servitude. Okay? And she came on the Caltida, the last ship that landed in Alabama. And there today they have a town called African Town, because 110 slaves from Nigeria came there. And she had a daughter named Aisha. And that's her sitting with her grandchildren in 1912. And she died. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called her back in 1924. Bilali Muhammad, Sapelo Islands of Georgia. He was literate. In fact, he kept the slave records in Arabic. And he had 400 slaves under his authority. And when the British set their ships, their warships in the waters of Georgia, the master gave his servants 400 muskets to defend the frontiers of America. He never allowed his master to see his Quran. Okay? It's very interesting. And this is, of course, you know her. Get a book. Okay. Phyllis Whitley. Okay, she was named by the boat that brought her to Phyllis, and it was the Whitley family that owned her. And she was literate, and she used to write Arabic on the wall. And she was about 7 years old when she was kidnapped, and they could only determine that because she didn't have her two front teeth. MashaAllah. And of course we have who? Say it? Muhammad Bakwakwa. He actually was in captivity in Brazil, and is the only slave narrative that we have about the slave culture in Brazil, and he wrote it in Arabic. Subhanallah. And we have Lemon Kebe. He and Omar Saeed were pen pals. They used to write letters to each other in Arabic. You see, we have to make sure that when we talk about the legacy of Islam and its evolution and its revival and institutions and pioneers in America, we have to educate ourselves, and we have to put it in the school systems of the Muslim schools, because it will embarrass our children if someone non-Muslim would ask them, who is Omar Saeed? Who is Suleiman Joe? Who is Muhammad bin Saeed? Because we have not integrated the experience, even though it was horrific, of the Muslims in America into our educational system. And of course, you have to know this person. I have to give a book away. Please, let me give a book away. That is Alexander Russell Webb. He was the first Anglo-American Muslim. Okay? The first Anglo-American Muslim. Now, let us reflect on those people who came to America. When they came here, they had tribal identities. They knew who they were. They were either Mandinka or Fulani, Mende, Shua, Baghara. They were Berbers, Tamazighs, Arabs, Moors. Everybody was mixed in that culture with cultural integrity, but of course through racism and white supremacy that was erased. And once it was erased, they were redefined with derogatory names, names that was subjugating, oppressive, insulting. And if you can look at the Census Bureau, they're all synonyms. They did not restore the cultural integrity back to those people they had enslaved for over 300 years. Now, if you look into the annuals of law, did you know they had legislation of how to control a slave? The Negro law of South Carolina, I'm from North Carolina, one mile up. I went to segregated schools. I experienced Jim Crow legislation. I can recall as a youngster, me and my brother Imam Ali, we had to go to the top of the theater to look at the movies. We had to go to the windows of the restaurants to get our food. And we could not sit down and dine in public places. And our school system was totally segregated. So when I think about Gaza, it's relative to my own experience. So in this Negro law of South Carolina, it was specifically to say that the term Negro was confined to a slave African. That was synonymous. And this is why you saw the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement pushing back on these terminologies. Oh, when you find it in the history books, it sounds like it is acceptable, that we have condoned it, but it was actually a smack in your face, because all of your cultural identity and your tribal identity, your integrity and your legacy was stripped away from you. But it made it an exclusion. It says, except for Egyptians, Moors, and the Lascars. Okay, who are these? They were the same people. Listen to me. The difference was that those Muslims who came to America in captivity, they were intelligent, they were literate, they spoke Arabic, they spoke Wolof, Mandinka, all of the language. And they had a higher level of intellect. And it was unbefitting for the whites in America to say that blacks had intelligence. So they reclassified those who were Muslims with intellect and said, no, you're not African. You are either Egyptian, or you are a Moor, or you are Lascar. we call that the white Africans. Not in complexion of phenology, but in fact, they called them white Africans because they wanted to separate or reclassify them. MashaAllah. And the reason why the Moors was given concessions is because you can recall in American history that in 1776, what happened? America gained its independence from Britain. And as a result of that, the American ships that were sailing on the seas did not have any protection. So the pirates would just go get the USA ships. So Morocco was the first Muslim country to recognize the sovereignty of America. So they made an agreement that if you protect our ships on the Mediterranean seas, then we will give an exemption to those slaves who can identify as subjects of the Sultan of Morocco. So they was given an exemption, and also we were capturing white Christians on the seas. So it was an exchange. It wasn't that they had any real love for you. And of course, this is a read-through that talks about in the South Carolina, that there was a large migration of Moors in that particular area. And also we had something called the Moors or the Moors Sundry Act. Anyone ever heard of the Moors Sundry Act of 1790? Raise your hand, show of hands. It was actually an advisory resolution in which the slaves that could identify as subjects of the Sultan of Morocco be given exemptions in the court of law if they in fact committed a crime or misdemeanor, that they would not be tried under the Negro law. Because we know in the courts, when a slave or a freed person of color, it didn't matter, that you were not given any justice. So these four people with their wives was captured after being lied to by Captain Clark that they would be delivered back to their homeland. Instead, the ship changed its course and it sold them in South Carolina. And they actually worked there as slaves and purchased their freedoms. And they asked the state of South Carolina not to try them under the Negro Act. My client is not a Negro, though it is a crime to be a Negro. Abraham Lincoln. That's before he became the president now. He was an attorney, okay? And he represented a Moorish plaintiff from Portugal in the case of William Dunley versus Joseph Spencer. And the newspaper referred to William as Black Bill. I don't have to tell you why they call him Black Bill. So Abraham Lincoln argued his case. Now listen at the dialogue. My client is not a Negro, though it is a crime. It is a crime to be a Negro. His skin may not be as white as ours, but I say, no. It's no crime to be born with black skin, but his skin may not be as white as ours, but I say he's not a Negro, though he may be a Moor. Abraham Lincoln. Do you know it's illegal in the state of Illinois for either free people of color or enslaved people to live in that state? Could you imagine that? So this Gaza thing is like a nightmare to me. And of course, we know in 1865, that was the Emancipation Proclamation. It took them a year to decide whether they're going to let them go or not. It didn't free everybody, just the slaves in the rebel states. And of course, we know that it left those people for 100 years, 1865 to 1965. I was born in 1956. That I caught the brunt of that we lived a life of half free and half slave. And this is how they left us, with nothing, okay? With nothing. So we had to start over. They had taken our Islam, it had faded away to the point that those descendants of Muslims could only remember the echo and articulate the actions of their parents. And then you can see I had to translate the Ebonics because that's how illiterate the community was left. But alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's in control. And you see, there were two individuals from South Carolina. One on the left is Noble Drew Ali, and the one on the right is Lomax Bey. In 1920, they established the Moorish Temple of Science. And people are not familiar with that organization. Give me a show of hands if you heard of the Moorish Science Temple, the Moorish Temple of Science. Okay. Did you know in the very inception of that organization, there were Muslims? There were Muslims. And you can see the signature of Drew Ali and Lomax, James Lomax. But something happened along the way. Now you see the name of the organization changes from the Moorish Temple of Science to the Moorish Science Temple, and now one signature appears there, and that is who? Drew Ali. There was a split because Drew Ali chose to introduce a pseudo-theology, okay? And Professor Ezzeddin or Lomax Bey rejected that, and they removed him. And as a result of that, he established his own organization. And there were Muslims in America in the 20s. As you can see, you see Deuce Muhammad Ali, okay, embracing one of the imams at an Eid. Deuce Ali was from Egypt, okay? And at that time, there was anti-miscegenation laws and segregation laws, meaning that if you had come from maybe Syria, Turkey, Lebanon, you had to be classified as white. So it was illegal for you to integrate with people of color. So even though you were a Muslim, you had to see your Muslim brothers struggling from a distance because you could not engage. But being that Deuce Muhammad Ali was from Egypt, he was what we call the white African. They gave him a pass. And also we see the first masjid that was built in America was built in 1921. And they destroyed it in 1926. They said, you have to tear it down. Okay? So this is the kind of struggle and the kind of history that we have been dealing with for some time. And also we have another person who was engaged in the early dawah in America, Seti Majid from Sudan. We call him Sheikh al-Islam fi America. And his major feat, one of his major feats was to get a fatwa against the deviation of the Moorish Science Temple and to guide the Muslims, okay, those people of color who were struggling to put the pieces back together. And being that he was from Sudan and he had the same complexion that those people who had been held in captivity, he was able to integrate and teach them Islam. And as a result of that, this is our teacher. Imam Ali Jaaber, myself and my family, we are recipients of the oldest Islamic Sunni institution in America. Our Sheikh Muhammad Ezzeddin, aka Lomax Bey, made a migration in 1930 to Turkey. This is called Al-Hijratul Ula, the first migration to escape racism in America. But it was during the time of World War I. Turkey had lost at a wholesale level, and they could not find ways and means to substantiate themselves. So he then made a migration to Egypt, and he studied at Al-Azhar University for 5 years. And he came back in 1936, and in 1938, he established the Adin-ul-Lahi Jam'iyyat al-Arabiyyah al-Ummiyya, the Adin-ul-Lahi Universal Arabic Association. And the motto was to find and remind the lost children of that African diaspora, to relieve the oppression, to correct abuse, and to carve out for our posterity a society and a destiny that was compatible to our idea of perfect manhood and Allah's purpose in creating us in order that we may save ourselves from the Creator. That's what we was upon. And of course, we know the FBI was always crawling on those groups that was trying to put it back together. And we have 617 unclassified, declassified FBI files on our organization. So that is why it didn't reach you, because they suppressed that. And not only that, we were builders. We built our own communities with our own skills. And today we possess 300 acres of land, okay? Muslim property that we purchased in 1941, okay? And you see the top, look at the masjid, 1941. And the masjid under the bottom is where me and my brother Imam Ali used to go in the summertime and during the school breaks to study Islam. And that's why when they say, Aina ta'alamtu lughat al-arabiyya wa antum mawlud fi America, how you learn Arabic and you was born in America? I said, min tufulati. You see? I learned it from my childhood. But it didn't reach you. And not only that, this is the gathering that we had at a National Assembly. These are the adults. There weren't a lot of us. And we were left in the dark to struggle for ourselves. And this is the first United Muslim Conference in America. And if you look at the spectrum of people there, it displays diversity. Okay? We were not a quote-unquote racial-orientated organization. We had people from India, from Arabia, from Yemen, from Syria, from everywhere in the Muslim world who was participating, trying to bring Islam back together. So we're behind, brothers and sisters. And again, you see the FBI crawling on us, identifying those groups. And out of those people came pioneers, okay? Pioneers. Sheikh Dawood Faisal, 143 State Street in Brooklyn, New York. Who prayed in that masjid? Give me a show of hands. Alhamdulillah. That's where we started. I started, the first khutbah I gave, I was 18 from that masjid. MashaAllah. And Sheikh Dawood Faisal was the representative on the United Nations level for the Muslims. And they too purchased 130 acres of land to build the Medina. But we got no support. Huh? We couldn't even pay the land taxes on them, so we lost a lot. Okay? I'm talking about we lost villages. And of course, Ahmed Nasser. As you can see, Walter Smith Bay, which means he was a Moor. And now today, it evolved into the International Brotherhood and Cuba Institute in Philadelphia. And Sheikh Nafi Abdul Muhammad took the lead, and his sons, Anwar Abdul Muhammad, Sheikh Anwar Abdul Muhammad, and his brother Anis took the lead, and they run that institution today. And Sheikh Anwar was the first American-born Muslim to acquire an ijazah in the memorization of the Quran. So this is our legacy. And Hajj Wali Akram, the first master of Cleveland, who prayed in Cleveland, Ohio, raise your hands. Okay, that's his grandson, Imam Abbas. Okay, so you see a generation there. And we come back to, of course, Muhammad Alexander Russell Webb. Do you know something that is very unique about this person? That he himself became a Muslim without ever meeting a Muslim. He was able to do religious comparative studies, and he found that Islam was more securing in happiness for the next life. And he was the only Muslim in 1893 to represent Islam in the First World Religious Conference. Subhanallah. This is our legacy, the first Anglo-American Muslim. And now in closing, I want to show you two dynamic personalities. Who familiar with Malcolm X? Raise your hands. Subhanallah. Who's familiar with Haji Sham Jaaber? Raise your hand. Okay, I call him El Jund al-Mashhur, the unknown soldier. Haj Malik Shabazz was the leader of the Nation of Islam, the national representative for 10 years. And my father was the imam for the Dinullah Universal Arabic Association until his demise. And they were actually on opposite sides, because Malcolm himself had embraced the theology of the Nation of Islam, And we understand that doctrine. And it's been recorded in what? Who read the book, Alex Haley, the autobiography of Malcolm X? Yes. You know, that's how most people know Malcolm. Do you know that book has 577 pages? It has 19 chapters, and only 2 chapters in it is dedicated to Malcolm's life as a Muslim. And that's only 53 pages. And that's why we say this is the missing link. This is what he left out. Okay? Alex Haley was supposed to be a ghostwriter, but he was a collaborator. And as you can see in the notes, as they was editing, the red lines and trying to find an appropriate vocabulary to express what Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz Malcolm X was trying to say. And do you know that the book was published after the death of Malcolm? Do you know he left out 5 chapters? Do you know Malcolm said, I only trust you 75%? Okay? So we have to consider that. And who saw the movie X? Raise your hands. Okay. You know, I was supposed to be in that movie. Spike owed me 80,000, but that's another story. Okay? No, literally. And Imam Ali sit on the consultation board. But do you know that they left out a missing cast? How much time I have, moderator? 2 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, I'm gonna wrap this in 5. And this is called the missing cast. None of these people appeared in Spike Lee's movie, X. Ella Collins was Malcolm's sister. She was his second mother who raised him. She was the one who paid for his Hajj to Mecca. She was the one who paid for his janazah. But she wasn't in the movie. We have Akbar Muhammad, Elijah Muhammad's youngest son, who had a PhD in Islamic studies that graduated from Al-Azhar. Okay? He wasn't cast in the movie. We have Ahmed Osman, who was the one who arranged Malcolm's Shahada, who arranged Malcolm's pilgrimage to Mecca, and he was the one who spoke at his janazah. He's not cast in the movie. Sheikh Dawood Faisal, 143 State Street, was a mentor to Malcolm. We have Sheikh Muhammad Surur Sabban, who was the Secretary General of the Rabita Islamiyya in Mecca, who funded Malcolm. He wasn't cast in the movie. And we have Sheikh Hassoun, Ahmed Hassoun, who was Malcolm's personal teacher. He was not cast in the movie. And of course, we see all the ones at the bottom was not cast in the movie, such as Maya Angelou, Shirley Dubois, and also Yuri Kochiyama, who was actually the only non-African, Afro-American, or person of color that was a member of the OAU. And she was the one on the stage when Malcolm was assassinated. And of course, Imam Wahid Muhammad, who's known for the massive transformation of the Nation of Islam on the Sunnah, when over 2,000 Muslims in one setting took their Shahada. And of course, Prince Faisal. Now, he wasn't king at that time. He was the one who actually abolished slavery in Saudi Arabia in 1962. And he was the one who actually hosted Malcolm when he made the pilgrimage. And of course, my father, Al-Hajj Jaaber, who was responsible for Malcolm's transition from the Nation of Islam to Sunni Islam. So this is the missing chapter. Malcolm took his Shahada in 1960 what? 4. He was killed in 1960. Okay, he was on the Shahada for less than a year. But within that, he was awarded 21 scholarships from the Muslim World League for his students to study in Medina. He got an ijazah from Al-Azhar. And as you can see, he changed his Islam and he prayed, as the Prophet said, Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. And of course, we know that Malcolm himself went to the refugee camps in Gaza. Yes, he made a physical appearance there. And of course, and when he was assassinated, look on the stage. Look how many women was around. And each and every one of these women have a resume that's worth researching. Yeah, you were in the struggle too, okay? All right? And that's my father, Al-Hajj Jaaber. And of course, you know, that's in the book. We don't have enough time to go through that. And that's why he wrote the book, I Buried Malcolm. And I contributed 2 bonus chapters of Malcolm I Buried and also the legacy of Hajj Jaaber. Inshallah ta'ala, it would be something worth exploring, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.